Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. Today is Wednesday, and my name is Ivana. If you are new here, today we are joined by a very special guest, and that is Mr. Senator Doug Jones. Senator Jones has come on today to answer some questions that we have and also that were submitted by our readers and by our audience ahead of next week's election. So, Senator, we thank you so much for your time. We know you're a busy man and this is a busy week. I do want to go ahead and point out before we get into some of these questions that we did offer Tommy Tuberville the same opportunity to come on and to answer some questions, but he declined to participate. So want to go ahead and make sure that is known. So Senator, again, thanks so much for your time. We've got a lot of good questions today and hope you're ready.
I'm ready. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. This is a great opportunity to speak to the people. It's not just to you, Ivana, it is speaking to the people. So thank you very much.
Yes, sir. So first, let's start off with something that is very timely at the moment, especially after Monday night and yesterday. And that is the confirmation of now Justice Amy Coney Barrett. You voted against Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett on Monday night. Presumably, the majority of Alabamians would support these nominations, even if your Democratic supporters do not support them. If the majority of Alabamians would support the confirmations of Justice Kavanaugh and now Justice Barrett, why did you vote against them?
Well, look, first of all, I don't think a public servant's job is to necessarily take a poll and vote in a poll. If that's the case, you wouldn't have to have anybody who had a brain or to think or to try to research and try to make the best judgment they can. In this particular case, I have just been appalled at the political hypocrisy. I really believe that one of the problems that we've got in this country right now is the hyper-partisanship in which everything is political power grabs. And people look at the Congress and we're held in such low esteem. And I think part of that is just because of the political hypocrisy that you see. And that's what happened with Justice Barrett's confirmation. What we saw 4 years ago is that Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, refused to give President Obama's appointment a nomination of Merrick Garland, even the time of day. Nothing. No, there was nothing, no hearings, no meetings. There was nothing that occurred. And at that point, both of them said the American people should have a say in the outcome of this nomination, whichever way it goes. That was a 10-month process, 10 months for that vacancy. Justice Ginsburg died 50 days from this election. But all of a sudden, the political winds had shifted, and now the political hypocrisy took over, where they made a political power grab to do this. And it was just wrong. It has hurt the institution of the Senate's credibility. Continue to do that with the way McConnell does it. It's hurting the independence and the credibility of the United States Supreme Court. And I just didn't want to have a part of that. That's why I made an announcement about voting against her even before the nomination was made, that it was about the process for me. It was not about her qualification. The fact is, Ivana, I voted for 72% of President Trump's judges that have been before me, based on what I believe is whether they have a political, a judicial agenda, which I vote against, versus a judicial philosophy, which I'm fine with. 72% of those judges. But this was the height of political hypocrisy, and it's damaged the Senate very, very much, and it's damaged the credibility of the Supreme Court, which is now seen as a political branch of government and not a judicial independent branch.
We've got several readers, Monty and Margie, just to point out two of their names, who said they are Republicans, but they voted for you in 2017, that December 2017 special election. But they said after your no vote against now Justice Barrett, that they are not going to vote for you next week. What do you say to constituents like Monty, Margie, and people who have that same sentiment?
I would say it's very unfortunate, because if you look, you have to look at a senator, you have to look at the entire record. It's not just about, there were 4 votes that I've taken out of 900 votes that involve Supreme Court justices. Again, I've supported President Trump's judges 72% of the time. My voting record with Senator Shelby is about 67%, and it's 67% with Senator Schumer. That's an independent voice for Alabama. And what we've done on the other things, 22 bipartisan bills that have been passed by the Senate, signed into law by President Trump, bipartisan bills that help folks in Alabama, that help veterans, help farmers, help build our military, done the things that I believe are one Alabama. And I think it's really unfortunate if people base their vote only on one or two votes that they disagree with, because no one agrees with me on every vote I take, and my wife doesn't agree with me on every vote I take. But if you look at my record for Alabama, it is a record of moderation. It's a record of reaching across the aisle because people told me to do that. People said, reach across the aisle to get things done. That's exactly what I've done. Reached across the aisle, got things done for the people of Alabama. And I would hope that people would look at the entire record, because the other side, there is no way on God's green earth that Tommy Tuberville is going to be able to get things done, because for him, it's good versus evil. He calls Democrats communist and Marxist. And you can't come into the United States Senate with that kind of extremist attitude and get things done for the people of Alabama. Yeah, he might be a good vote on a few of those votes like that, but for getting things done, it's not going to happen, folks. It's just not going to happen.
I want to move on to the topic of the coronavirus and healthcare. We know that unfortunately this year it's really hard to ignore coronavirus. It is something that we are living with, all of us, day in and day out. Now, President Donald Trump has been criticized for his handling of the coronavirus. What do you specifically think the president could have done differently to save American lives? And what do you think could have done differently? And what could, say, a possible President Biden do differently than what President Trump has done?
Well, I think there's a lot of things, and the answer is really the same. The first thing that the president could have done and should have done is to level with the American people. He did not do that. This was a very serious virus from the very beginning. His healthcare officials were saying that. He knew that, and he should have leveled with the American people to start taking precautions early, to make sure that people understood that this virus had never been seen in the history of mankind. It was new. We didn't know how to combat it. We were going to be learning about it. And now we know. The president knew all of this early on, but instead of telling the American people, he was truly more interested in how it was going to affect the stock market, and as opposed to the American people. He could have leveled with folks, said, we're going to have to make some sacrifices here. We're going to have to gird up. We're going to have to make sacrifices. It's going to hurt. We're going to have to shut down some things. We're going to have to wear masks. We're going to have to do those things necessary. That's not going to cause people to panic. You don't do that. You don't have James Spann and folks like that telling people, I shouldn't talk about this hurricane coming because I don't want people to panic and try to flee. You tell them straight so they can be prepared, not only for the things they've got to do to protect themselves, but the things that they can do to be ready for the long haul, that to make the sacrifices, because you know what? The American people make sacrifices for each other. We've done it throughout our history. The first thing he should have done was to level with the American people and not try to pretend this virus was going away, that we have turned the corner, it was miraculously going to appear. The second thing he should have done, he should have taken control of the testing. He should have taken control of delivering the protective equipment that was in short supply of. He should have invoked the Defense Production Act in many more sectors to build more PPE, to get the testing done more rapidly. He didn't do any of that. He just pretended to do that it was going to go away. We should have had a much more aggressive response to this from the federal government. States should have not been pitted against each other and trying to buy PPE and get testing. That could have been the federal government's role, and they could have helped move resources appropriately to the hot spots as they popped up. He didn't do anything. I think Joe Biden would have done that. I really believe he could have taken control of that, because there's one thing about Joe Biden. He will level with you. He will look you straight in the eye and tell you what's going on, whether you agree with him or not. And that finally, this should have never been politicized. The wearing the mask, the vaccines, all of this. I worry now that so many people won't get a vaccine because they don't trust it, when in fact, it will have been FDA approved and people should be taking it. So it was really a complete lack of leadership that has led us to this point, and it may still get worse before it gets better.
I want to pivot to a question on healthcare. This is from one of our viewers. Her name is Susan. Susan says, what will you do to make sure and help people like me who were born with pre-existing conditions to make sure we do not lose our insurance coverage during this time? For me, I have two plans in place, but there's no way they will have the same level or quality of care covered that I currently have. And this will not cover life-saving treatments, and they have such strict limits that I would be facing a death sentence and homelessness and or bankruptcy because of it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I hear those stories all the time, and I wish I had a magic answer. That again has become such a political issue. I think because it all depends right now. We are operating and have been for the last 10 years under the Affordable Care Act. Unfortunately, in Alabama and places, the Affordable Care Act was demonized because it was attached to President Obama's name. But the fact is 150,000 Alabamians were able to get health insurance because of the Affordable Care Act. Some 957,000 people, like your questioner just then, were able to get insurance because of the Affordable Care Act. Kids are able to stay on because of the Affordable Care Act. Now, the problem that we've got right now, and by the way, for those of you who are listening, the Affordable Care Act was never meant to be this monolithic, set in stone piece of legislation. It was always going to be a work in progress. What was helping, what was not helping, where could you massage it? In fact, since I've been in the Senate, I've helped repeal 3 of the taxes that were on there, 2 of which had never gone into play: the medical device tax, the health insurance tax, and what they call the Cadillac tax to make fairness out of this. But the Affordable Care Act should have been a framework in which to work. It shouldn't have been this 10-year effort to try to scrap it under political, because the mandate there for pre-existing conditions is so important. You cannot just rid that, because if you do, the insurance premiums are going to grow crazy. What's going to happen is on November the 10th, a week after this election, the United States Supreme Court is going to hear a case, and it's going to make some determinations about the Affordable Care Act. And it's either going to throw the whole thing out or it's going to pull pieces out. And so I think Congress is going to have to react, because if the whole thing is going out, you're right. I think her name was Susan, is going to have real problems. So many people in Alabama will have problems. The people that buy on the exchanges and get tax credits and subsidies, folks are going to have problems. Insurance is a business of risk. And those businesses, in order to survive, have got to balance that risk. And if we can't figure out the right ways under the existing Affordable Care Act formula, rather than just scrapping the whole thing, then it's going to be a real problem for those people. So I think what we're going to end up having to do after this election's over, folks are going to have to start building a plan. And I can tell you the plan is going to be a lot of the basics of the Affordable Care Act. And I don't care what they call it. They can call it Trump Care if they want to. The president hasn't put a plan out there yet. But we're going to have to start building those basics, and then we're going to have to see what the Supreme Court says in order to make sure that the next plan, if it is completely thrown out or tweaked, parts of it, how it can pass a conservative Supreme Court. That's going to be a challenge, but it's a challenge that we have got to meet. And it can't be done by just politicizing the whole thing the way I see it now with folks who just say, get rid of it. It's costing too much. That's crazy. I'm not for a Medicare for all. I don't think that's the answer. But Medicaid expansion would have been big for Alabama, brought in billions of dollars, would have helped 300,000 to 400,000 more people. We've got to be looking at ways to get affordable care and access to care for all Alabamians, because when we do that, it lifts our economy and it lifts the health of us and our neighbors.
You mentioned Medicaid, expanded Medicaid. You introduced a bill to allow states that refused to expand Medicaid in the past to expand Medicaid now. But so far, Alabama has not done that. What more can you do if you're reelected to improve healthcare in Alabama if Governor Kay Ivey will not expand Medicaid?
Well, the thing that we're doing, the bill that you're talking about is called the SAME Act, the States Achieving Medicaid Expansion. And if you remember, under the Affordable Care Act, the states could have expanded Medicaid and got 100% reimbursement for 3 years, 100%. It wouldn't have cost a dime to do that. Then the states would have to start chipping in at 5% for a period of time, a short period of time, a couple of years, and then at 10%, which is what it is now. Alabama refused to do that. But by doing that, we left on the table billions of dollars. That's billions with a B that we could have brought in here, use that money to invest in our healthcare system so that when we did have to start reimbursing, we would have had the money to do it. We would have had the infrastructure to do it. So my bill would go back. It would give the 13 states all of whom, by the way, are in these deep red areas of the South. Not all, but overwhelmingly, I think 10 or 11 of them are in the deep South areas that are, very conservative, in which it became a political issue rather than an investment in people's health. I mean, even states like Governor Mike Pence, when he was governor of Indiana, expanded Medicaid. Even in Kentucky, they've expanded Medicaid. If we had done that, it would have been a huge help for us. I'm going to continue to advocate for that. We're going to have to wait, again, as I said, about the Affordable Care Act and what happens with the Supreme Court. But there's a couple of options. And I think if we have to go back to the drawing board, that will be an option depending on who wins the presidency. A public option, not Medicare for all. That is not going to happen, folks. People want to keep their health insurance plans, but a public option that would help the markets and help bring down costs, I think is a viable way to do that as well.
I want to ask you a couple policy questions and just questions about voting ahead of next week. It sounds crazy that November 3rd and Election Day is next week, but we are here. It is almost November, and whether we like it or not, it's here. So we know that a majority of Alabamians will presumably vote for President Donald Trump. In order for you to win and for you to go back to DC, you need to convince Republican voters to vote for you over Tommy Tuberville. So on issues like we have a lot of people talking about abortion, why should those Republican voters choose you and vote for you and send you back to DC?
Because I've had their back. And there's a lot of things, there's a number of things that President Trump has done that's not been good for Alabama that I oppose. There's a number of things that he would do. There's a number of things that Joe Biden will do that I will oppose. I'm not going to be the rubber stamp. Tommy Tuberville is simply going to be that. He's going to be a rubber stamp. And whether or not Alabama votes for Donald Trump or not, the overwhelming odds right now is that he's not going to be the president the next go round. And people need a senator who's looking out for them and has their back, somebody that can work with the other party. And look at what I've been able to do with Senator Shelby for the people of Alabama. As a seat on the Armed Services Committee, we've helped rebuild the America's defense while putting a lot of money in the Alabama economy, whether it's through Huntsville, Anniston, Birmingham, Montgomery, Mobile, Fort Rucker, and down in Dothan. We put a lot of money there. We've done things for veterans. We've done things for teachers and healthcare workers. And that is the people of Alabama. I don't want anybody to think, or they shouldn't think, if you look at my history, I have not been a rubber stamp for Donald Trump or the Democratic Party. What I've done is to try to do things for the people of Alabama, to help the folks in my state progress, all votes. That's helping the Black Belt as well as the Madison County Chamber of Commerce or the Mobile Chamber of Commerce. Tommy Tuberville can't say that. He's not going to do that. If you look at everything he has said, he wants people to simply vote against me and not for him, because he wants to highlight a couple of things. And that is not what is the kitchen table issues that people in Alabama care about. Some of them are important issues, don't make no mistake. A lot of what he's saying is just absolute lies, folks. I mean, defunding the police, junk like that, I'm not for that. He knows that. Everybody knows that. I was a former prosecutor. But the fact is, if you look at the 22 bills that we've gotten enacted into law and the many, many more that I'm a co-sponsor with in a bipartisan way, that's having the people of Alabama's back. And there are a lot of Trump supporters out there that overall like the things he did for the economy, which is great. I did too. But the fact is they're also uncomfortable. They're uncomfortable with the tweets. They're uncomfortable with the name calling. They're uncomfortable with the things that he says are just not true. And a member of Congress is not supposed to be a rubber stamp for anybody. A member of Congress is supposed to have the checks and balances. That's what I'll do regardless of who gets elected president.
You brought up several things in that answer that I want to go back to and I want to touch on, but let's just take a minute very quickly to answer a question that we get flooded with. And I'm sure that you've heard this from other outlets and other voters as well. And that is, do you support abortion through birth?
No, it's a damn lie. That's the only way I can say that. It's a damn lie. I've not ever supported something like that at all, period. End of discussion. Look, that's a tough issue, but that is, they were trying to put me in an extremist position. Let me tell you the opposite of that extreme though. And that is to the Alabama abortion law that got passed that Tommy Tuberville supports, that would make it a criminal violation for a doctor to perform an abortion, even in the case of rape or incest, even in despite the age of the victim. That's the extreme view. Tommy Tuberville's got the extreme view of that, but I do not support that. I do not at all.
Let's talk about something that has been another big focal point of 2020, and that is race, and that is racial injustice across the nation. Now, being from Alabama, and specifically from Birmingham, I know you said that you grew up in the Fairfield area, you are no stranger to civil rights. This year, we've seen racial inequality across America, and it's become a huge factor for voters in 2020. Can you understand why parents across the nation are concerned for their young Black sons, young Black teenagers? And do you think, just bluntly, that the law is enforced differently based upon racial lines?
There's no question that it is. I mean, look, I've been dealing in criminal justice for 40 years, and there's no question that it is. Now, it's not uniform by any stretch. Don't get me wrong, but there's no question that the law is not enforced in the same way. And I've talked to parents. I've talked to folks, so many people that are worried about their sons and their daughters when they get out. They're worried about themselves when they get out. And we can do better. We absolutely can do better. You know, I have said for so long that Alabama, I mean, we can't ignore the history that we had with Jim Crow and Bull Connor and George Wallace. And we can't ignore that. But what we can do, instead of being the place of such divisions, we can be the place of healing. Because at the end of the day, we're all in this together. We all need to make sure that for the state of Alabama to succeed, all people in this state need to succeed. And you can't do that when people are still being discriminated against, when in housing, in healthcare, in education, and in jobs. Together, we can find that common ground to make things better. But you gotta recognize the issue. You gotta, on the one hand, recognize how far we've come in racial justice and racial reconciliation, but how far we've got to go. And all voices need to be standing up. And again, it's become so politicized. Because I've stood up for racial equality and racial justice, and for telling people to stand up and speak out when they see it, I've been accused of wanting to defund the police, which is absolutely not right. Former prosecutor working with law enforcement. Law enforcement needs to be at the table because there are issues there that need to be rooted out. And I think everybody saw it. You've seen it over and over again, but this summer it really just hit home. We got to change that. And we can do that by working together, but we can't do it if it's us against them in political TV ads that just say things that are not true about your political opponent. You can't do it that way. You're not going to be able to find that common ground. It's going to be important for us going forward.
You answered one of my other questions in there about being a former U.S. attorney and your thoughts on that defund the police movement. So I appreciate you knocking out two birds with one stone there. We have a question from Kevin from Pike Road. Kevin says, do you support the Biden-Harris plan to regulate all rifles and handguns that are capable of holding over 10 rounds under the NFA? That would mean a Glock 19 with 3 magazines would require $800 in tax stamps, not counting engraving and fingerprinting fees.
No.
Additionally, since Jones is in favor of universal background checks, how does he intend to enforce it for private gun sales without a universal gun registry, random checks in people's homes, which is a violation of the Second and Fourth Amendment? And that is again from Kevin.
It's a good question, Kevin. And no, I don't support that. I do think we have to limit these giant magazines for ARs and things like that. I think you can do some of that. But, you know, I own a couple of those pistols myself that have more than a 10-round clip. So I am not for any of that. I think we have to do some common sense thing. And I am for expanded background checks at gun shows and things. And I do think you can set up a procedure, especially if we follow through with what I've been trying to work with. And we had some success in a bipartisan way of what they call fixing the NICS system to make the data that comes into the background check system more efficient, speedier, and to make it where the data is very good data, and you can get this back so that folks that are prohibited from getting a firearm, you know, that comes back through, but that those folks who are law-abiding citizens, like I assume yourself, Kevin, and me, can get that and get it quickly and efficiently, and everybody can enjoy the weapons. I grew up with guns. I got quite a few, both pistols, long guns, shotguns, you name it, because I'm a hunter, I'm a shooter. On expanded background checks, I don't use the term universal background checks. I use expanded background checks because I do think you can make exceptions for family members, people like that, because you should know their background. It's already a felony to knowingly sell somebody a firearm that has that to be a prohibited person. That's already a crime. And the way you adjust with your concern is you expand those penalties a little bit and make that a deterrent that way. But it's still got to be annoying. You can't, you can't just accidentally and not know. But if we had a more expanded background check, even for some private sales, it would be real simple to go to your local gun shop and get that background done very quickly. I don't think that is too much of a burden to ask. And I think we can put a deterrent effect on folks. And I think it would work, Kevin. I really do. I'm open to suggestions. I really am, because in my speeches that I've done on gun violence, the goal is to try to stop gun violence. And I think there's ways we can do within the law to do that. I'm not a gun grabber. I'm not for mandatory buybacks. I'm not for confiscating guns or any crap like that you hear about me. I'm a Second Amendment guy, but I also want to stem the tide of the number of people who die when a gun gets discharged, either intentionally or in many cases by accident, and when I put intentionally, there's also a huge suicide element to this that I think needs to be incorporated this. And there's that mental health element that I think is important too.
We have just a quick follow-up on that Second Amendment question. We have Brett asking us in the comments what your feelings are about trigger locks.
Well, I think they're great. I don't know if you can make them mandatory. I have my guns in a safe, and really about the only people that have access to it are me and my son, who's 22 years old. So I think trigger locks, if you don't have a safe, and especially if you have kids around there, I think it would be really important. I don't know how you enforce something like that, but to make it. But I would encourage everyone. Gun safety is so important. We hear the horror stories. Gun safety is important, but if you had those locks on there, you could save some lives. I would just encourage those uses. And every time you buy a gun these days, you get one. If you buy a new gun, you get a trigger lock with it generally, or at least the new ones that I bought in the last 10 years all came with one. So I just encourage their use big time.
We have a question I'm going to pivot to, and I do not think I caught this person's name, but there's questions about stimulus bills. Mm-hmm. That, again, is something that has been a big part of 2020. We know so many people have been affected, not only just their health, but they have been affected financially because of the coronavirus. So we have questions about the stimulus bills. Do you support Nancy Pelosi's or Mitch McConnell's stimulus bill?
Okay, the short answer to that is no and no. And here's why. Well, first of all, let me say this. I think we used the wrong term. None of these are stimulus bills. We're not stimulating the economy. What we're trying to do is still save it. And we're still trying to save lives and livelihoods. If we start getting on the back end of this, then there will be some stimulus, infrastructure and things like that to try to help get revenue back in to the economy and to the Treasury. So here's why I answered no and no. The House passed a bill in May, $3 trillion called the HEROES Act. It was a good framework, but there are so many things in that bill that I didn't like, and it would have never made it to the Senate. But it did provide a framework. It gave money for state and local governments. It gave money to put back into the payroll protection plan, which helped people stay on the payroll instead of unemployment. It would extend unemployment benefits, give them money for schools, give money for more testings. So it was a hell of a good framework to start. But unfortunately, McConnell refused. And the administration didn't even want to talk about it. They really thought that the economy would open back up by itself, and by now we'd be rocking and rolling. But that was just totally unrealistic. It was pie in the sky. The virus was going to stay with us. So throughout the summer, we were asking for more. Finally, in August, they started talking about one. And McConnell put a series of bills out there, not one, but a series worth about 1.1 trillion or something like that. Still didn't do as much as I thought it should. Those negotiations broke, we left down. And what happened is Senator McConnell was having trouble in his own Republican caucus because there are still people over there that don't want to do anything, that they think we've spent enough money, despite what the chairman of the Federal Reserve says and every economist that says we've got to Congress is going to have to put more money out there to continue to save this economy, keep it from going into a deeper recession than what we hit there for a little bit. So in order to get more political votes, he went even below and came up with something that was just totally inadequate. Put a little more money in businesses, but also and put money in education, but put a lot of strings attached to it. Had poison pills in it left and right. He knew it was not going to. He knew it was not going to pass. The House. I know this is a long answer, and I apologize, but there's been a lot going on, but just nothing done, and that's just drives me nuts. The House passed another version, a more streamlined version that is a lot closer to what I think is appropriate. I haven't seen all the details to it, but what the House had was a lot closer to what I think was appropriate, a lot closer to what ultimately President Trump and Secretary Mnuchin were saying. It was McConnell who was stuck back in ways that was just never going to happen. If we had stuck with that plus or minus $2 trillion, allowed some for state and local governments, for broadband, those kind of things that were not in McConnell's package, we could have gotten something done. But Mitch McConnell says, nope, just let's wait. I don't know where it'll stand right there, but there's a bill there. I can assure you there's a bill there. We just got to put partisan politics aside and get it done, because that bill's there, and it will be there to help all Alabamians, help our city and county governments, help with contact tracing, help with testing. It is there, but everybody's got to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good and bite the bullet on some things they might disagree with so we can help the American people. That's what compromise and bipartisanship, folks, is all about.
We've got another question related to the coronavirus, and I think you mentioned vaccines earlier, and this is from Melanie. Melanie says, I voted for you. I plan to vote for you again next week. But I'm worried that if both houses are led by Democrats, a bill will be pushed to give strong incentives to states that mandate coronavirus vaccines for adults to be able to work or access other services. Can you promise that you would never vote for such an overreaching bill?
No, I don't think that would be an appropriate bill. And quite frankly, I've never heard anybody say that. I mean, you could see there may be somebody on the far left that have said that, but I haven't heard it in any of my discussions with my colleagues in the Senate or the conversations I've had with the Biden-Harris camp. I think everybody's job right now is to lead by example. And if we have a vaccine, we need to encourage people. There are folks in the country right now who won't get their children vaccinated for the various things that have been proven to work. And I think it's an education right now. And rather than, one of the problems we got, folks, is watching that pendulum swing from left to right and right to left. I don't think that we should overreact to people who are saying, I'm not going to get the vaccine because I don't trust it because of Donald Trump and whatever. We can't do that. We've got to educate people. And I believe that we're going to get a vaccine. I think it's going to be one. I have had Dr. Fauci, Dr. Hahn, Dr. Redfield, all of these folks in front of my committees. I've talked to them. I believe the people that are working on these vaccines and at the FDA are good folks, and they got the interest of the American people at heart, and the world, by the way, and the world. And that if a vaccine gets approved, it's going to be something that everybody should do. And education, not mandating it, is the way to go.
I have one more question for you, and this is, I think, encompasses several of these topics, and that is that there are voters who may agree with President Trump's policies, but do not feel comfortable with his character. And that might be something they really have to reconcile when they go to the ballot box. Now, similarly, there may be some people who really like your character, but disagree with some of your policies. So my question for you is, should voters elect somebody, whether that is their senator or their president, based solely on what they can do politically, or should character be a factor?
Well, I think character has to count, folks. I mean, character has to count, because it is, in fact, character that drives so much of your policies. And if you look at some of the things, and I know exactly what they're saying about President Trump, and I agree. Unfortunately, I think his divisive rhetoric, his almost sometimes bullying and hateful rhetoric, is dividing this country. And so character counts, because what character does, in my view, is help mold policies that are not my way or the highway. Remember that to get things done, you've got to talk to people on the other side of the aisle. And sometimes, like in my party, I got to talk to people on my side of the aisle and bring them in too. And the way you do that is not by the rhetoric, is not by the hateful, political rhetoric and divisive speech. It's by trying to have a character that people can trust and they rely on, and finding that common ground. And that's where character does count. I can't tell you how to weigh that versus, policies and procedures, but I can tell you that if you look, for instance, at what I've tried to do, what you'll see is I believe that my character has helped me develop policies that are good for Alabama, those 22 bills, the things that I'm advocating for so many people. And that has to move it. And I worry very much that the character of Donald Trump drives people apart. It completely drives people apart and nothing can get done. And I really worry about that very, very much. And so I would use both of those and try to weigh, because I do think they're connected. They're not separate issues. Character drives not just your policy, but how you actually get things done and for the people you represent.
Senator, we so much appreciate you taking some time here to answer both our questions and our reader questions. If you are a student at Auburn University, you can catch the senator at a forum tonight at 6 p.m. That is an event hosted jointly by the Auburn College Democrats and the Auburn College Republicans. We can learn something from these college students putting on this bipartisan event. And the senator will be there tonight at 6, open only to students, and there will be masks required and other coronavirus measures taken. So, Senator, again, we thank you so much for your time. Everybody watching, we thank you for your participation and for your time as well. So, Senator, we appreciate it.
Thank you, Amanda. It's been a pleasure being with you. Thanks, everybody.